International efforts are underway to supply U.S.-made F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine, with U.S. President Joe Biden giving the green light at a recent meeting of G7 leaders. We have this look now at how the coalition came about in the wake of relentless lobbying from the Ukrainian president.
It was a powerful symbol of a country desperate for help. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy gifting a fighter pilot's helmet to his British hosts earlier this year.
I will explain. The writing on the helmet reads, "We have freedom, give us wings to protect it."
It was a message he would repeat time and again, whenever and wherever he could.
We also need modern fighter jets.
Ukraine says fighter jets like the US-built F-16 would provide air cover to ground forces, protect people and critical infrastructure from Russian drone or missile attacks, and help them win this war. Now, its allies have answered the call.
The United States, together with our allies and partners, is going to begin training Ukrainian pilots in fourth-generation fighter aircraft, including F-16s.
The international fighter jet coalition looks like this. The US, UK, France and others have pledged to train Ukrainian pilots on modern fighter jets. That paves the way for Kiev to get its hands on the cherished F-16 model. Exactly where from and when is not yet clear.
The very first Ukrainian F-16 will be one of the strongest signals from the world that Russia will only lose because of its own aggression. It will become weaker and further isolated.
For now, Germany has stayed out of the coalition, but Defence Minister Boris Pistorius has not ruled out playing a supporting role in the future.
For more now, we can talk to Rafael Loos, a foreign policy and security expert with the European Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks for being with us. Rafael, how big of a difference would F-16s or similar fighter jets make on the battlefield in Ukraine?
The F-16 are supposed to intercept Russian cruise and ballistic missiles and drones. They are supposed to keep Russia's own aircraft at bay, and they're supposed to support Ukraine's ground forces as they maneuver to liberate more territory. More importantly, though, the stocks of Soviet-produced material for Ukraine's air forces is dwindling. And so this is both an attempt to help them transition to Western-produced aircraft with a more sustainable chain of supply for munitions, spare parts, and so on and so forth, but also a very strong political signal that Ukraine's allies are with Ukraine as long as it takes.
Are you fully convinced, Rafael, that the West should deliver F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine?
I think certainly this is the next logical step. At numerous times, we've seen Vladimir Putin make threats of escalation, and this is something that Western leaders have kept in their minds and that so far, I think, deterred them from taking the step. Nonetheless, we haven't seen any threats really materialize, either vis-à-vis Ukraine. There's already a terror bombing campaign going on that Russia is conducting against civilians, neither against NATO targets, critical infrastructure, or other targets. And so I think even though Vladimir Putin certainly does have the potential to escalate this conflict, there's no logical next step for him to take because any of them come with enormous risks and costs and uncertainties for him.
2 weeks ago, Chancellor Olaf Scholz of Germany said that his country would not participate in the international fighter jet coalition. Now his defense minister, Boris Pistorius, says Germany might. What changed in Berlin's thinking, Rafael, and what would Germany be able to contribute to the jet coalition, given that it doesn't have any F-16s itself?
I think there's indeed numerous ways in which Germany could contribute to training Ukrainian pilots, for example, with simulated aircraft and ground-based facilities, training facilities. Germany could certainly contribute munitions for F-16 when they go into Ukraine, and could contribute financially to make possible the transfer of modern Western aircraft to Ukraine. But I agree with the Chancellor that German aircraft are unsuited largely for the roles that Ukraine is seeking to have them fulfill.
Whenever Kyiv asks for new weapons, Germany is extremely hesitant and waits for other countries to commit first before getting on board. Can you help our viewers understand, Raphael, why Chancellor Scholz appears to be so reluctant to show leadership in helping Ukraine defend itself?
That has indeed been a pattern that Olaf Scholz is reluctant to take the first step to lead a coalition. He has to be, carried into a leadership position, be it on air defense last summer, be it on tanks earlier this year. Germany is certainly making enormous contributions to Ukraine's self-defense. The sheer quantity and quality of capabilities that German armed forces, German industry, the German government have provided to Ukraine's army are speak for themselves. But certainly political leadership looks different than what Olaf Scholz has shown so far, and doesn't quite meet his own requirement for Germany playing the role of a guarantor of security on the European continent.
Raphael, thank you very much for your analysis. That was Raphael Loos with the European Council on Foreign Relations.
Fabrice Potier is a former NATO policy chief and now serves as CEO of the international political and security consultancy firm Rasmussen Global. You recently returned from Kyiv, I believe, where you met with policy leaders there. What would you say Ukraine needs most right now from its Western allies?
I would say two things. The one you were mentioning in your previous report, combat aircraft, fourth-generation combat aircraft, in order to compensate the fact that they are running low on air defense ammunitions, which, as you also reported, the Russians are putting more pressure on over the last few days. And on the longer term, I think what they really need is the guarantee that they belong to the Euro-Atlantic Security Order. And you can do that in two ways. One is providing security guarantees alongside the US-Israel model with real commitments by a group of guarantors, including Germany, and at the same time start a credible path to NATO membership. Because I think this is going to be the best way to make sure Ukraine can defend itself and actually can be part of how we defend ourselves against an aggressive Russia.
Well, those pledges keep coming from both the US and Germany. And the Ukrainian president is currently meeting with European leaders in Moldova, while NATO foreign ministers meet in Norway, all trying to shore up support against Russian aggression. You wrote recently in an op-ed for The Economist that it's time the West committed to Ukraine for the long haul. What do you mean by that?
Well, exactly what I mentioned, which is both NATO membership for Ukraine, and whilst the membership, the integration is obviously not something that is going to happen overnight, to give a bridging solution called security guarantees. And
yeah, but that's not going to happen overnight, is it, as you say?
Well, security guarantees can. It's just, a question of some key guarantor nations like Germany, France, UK, US, Poland, and others to sign real commitments that what they are doing now is a commitment in an open-ended way and will continue as long as it takes. And so it's in a way to put the as long as it takes that the G7 that was hosted by Germany declared last year, to put that in concrete commitments.
But in saying it as long as it takes, isn't that just prolonging this war? We saw German Chancellor Olaf Scholz very early on in the beginning saying that Ukraine is a turning point, promising a more muscular Germany to the international stage. And yet many have since criticised the Chancellor for talking the talk, not walking the walk.
Well, I think Germany has done more than sometimes it is recognized, maybe because it came to doing more through a lot of political contortions, which I think has muddled the message. But if you look on the paper at what Germany is delivering, Germany is leading the way as far as the European contributions are concerned. So that's one thing. Second, I know it sounds dissonant, but I think if you want to cut short this war, if you want to end this war on terms that are sustainable, that means Ukrainian terms, you have to make a long-term commitment. Because fundamentally, this is what will tell Vladimir Putin that the strategy of waiting for another season, waiting for another US presidential elections, even that strategy is not going to give him success. So we need to close that gap in terms of the long-term ambiguity about where does Ukraine belong.
But just explain to me the subtext here. Is it about helping Ukraine bit by bit to hold off the Russians, or is it a whole lot of Western nations worried that Ukraine could, with this heavy weaponry from the West, suddenly drive out the Russians and go further than that and take back the Crimea?
Well, I think that's a bit of an overstretch, but there is indeed the realization that Ukraine is going to emerge, and is fast emerging out of this war and the war effort, as one of the prime European defense power, military power. And what you want to do here is to, in order for Ukraine to be a full contributor to European defense and security, is to put Ukraine inside our framework rather than outside, which is what we have been doing for too many decades. So I think it's both about Ukraine being indeed the front line to hold and contain an aggressive Russia, as long as it remains aggressive, but also to make sure Ukraine is inside our framework and our family and our planning, so that it's also a sustainable defense player.
Former NATO policy chief Fabrice Portier, thank you very much for being here on DW News.
Thank you very much.